Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar. Really excited for it. We've got an awesome panel coming up, and really appreciate all of you joining us today. The topic today, which I hope you're all aware of, is how to prove the ROI of data quality. All of us work in data, and there's a constant battle between pushing insights, generating insights, and making sure that the data is high quality. And we've got some great panelists today to help us talk through that. For those of you who are attending one of our webinars for the first time, we do these kind of Looker data-focused webinars every 2 weeks. So they run this time every Wednesday, and we are from Spectacles. In the other 39 hours of the week, we sell Spectacles. These webinars are really just to kind of get the data community together, talk about data, answer questions, and kind of help us all skill up a little. So we've got one coming up in 2 weeks, which is all about access controls and permission management in Looker. It's an area where I think there's very little well-defined best practice out there, and lots of different ways that you can implement kind of access control and control permissions in Looker. And so we'd love to have you join us there in 2 weeks. And we'll shortly after this webinar, we'll also be announcing the webinars for kind of 4 weeks and 6 weeks from now as well. You can always find our webinars at spectacles.dev/webinars. And so I'd invite you to head over there and sign up whenever you have a chance. We've got a panel today for the first time on these webinars. We've done a lot of kind of single presentations, but really interested in having kind of a vibrant conversation today. So I'll be kind of hosting. We've got Kevin, who's the co-founder and CEO of Metaplane. He will do a proper introduction for himself in a second, but Kevin's just got a ton of experience in this area, and we're really excited to have him today. And then we have my co-founder and CTO at Spectacles, Josh Temple, here, who will be also joining us for today's panel. In just a second, we will jump into that, and I'll stop sharing my screen, and you'll see the three of us again. But in the last thing I wanted to say, some of you may have missed it, though I repeated ad nauseum before we kick off here. We do have a Slack channel where you can ask questions for the Q&A and kind of have conversations with the other attendees. I will drop that in the chat one last time here. So we'd invite you, if you're not already a member, to head over there. It's a great place to see the questions that people are answering, to kind of see and converse with the other people attending the webinar. And so that is there. And so on that note, I will stop sharing my screen, and we will jump into the panel proper. Let me pull all this up. There we go. So Kevin and Josh, thank you very much for being here today. To kick us off, would love for you to just, I gave basically your titles and your names, and would love for you both to just tell us a bit about yourselves, your backgrounds, and you both obviously run companies, so just the elevator pitch for the companies that you run. Kevin, we'll kick off with you.
Well, thank you both for having me here. I'm excited for our conversation, and thank you all for joining. You said my title was CEO. I prefer referring to myself as the Chief SQL Wrangler, because that's what I do day to day. But it's a little bit of a lie, because my first programming language or data querying language was Hive. Got started on it about 10 years ago. Hopefully one of the first and last of that generation to say that they were good at Hive once upon a time. But I got started in data from the research angle, was doing a lot of research to try and make data analysis easier. So given a data set, how can we infer as much as possible, or even give you results without having to query the data or express what you mean in terms of code? And it was very, I would say, successful from a research perspective. But as we were implementing these kinds of systems, you just imagine going into a Fortune 500 company saying, hey, try out our automated data analysis tool. Which database are you using? And they're like, okay, which of our 12 SAP instances do you want access to? Oh, by the way, they're all different versions. And once you have access to one, here's 1,000, schemas. And I'm like, okay, so what does this one schema mean? And they're like, oh, we don't know. That person left about 5 years ago. So Dang it. So since then, been working on Metaplane, trying to, in a way, solve the root problem, which is that in many cases, and this is changing, hopefully, through the work of everyone here today, data quality is a big impediment to making the best use of data. Uh, in all kinds of organizations today will be focused on commercial entities, probably. And once we can solve that root problem, maybe we'll lay the soil, the foundation for 1,000 flowers to bloom down the line. Could be a ChatGPT flower. I'm not sure, but right, I'm helping run Metaplane with an amazing team. We help companies and data teams be the first to know of data issues. So if anyone here today has gotten a Slack message from a VP of sales going to a board meeting and the number looks wrong, uh, from my perspective, that shouldn't happen. And the idea is that Metaplane can be the one telling you about that instead and give you all the context you need to determine whether this is a real issue and what you can do about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. Josh, you want to give us a bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Josh Temple. Also, thank you for attending today. And my experience in data and data quality has been in a number of different companies of different sizes, which I think will be interesting for our conversation today, because I think that data quality is something that you solve differently at different scales in an analytics team and in a company's development. My first experience on a data team was at a mid-sized company called Outcome Health, where that was where I really learned the ropes of SQL and Python and ETL and Airflow and all of that. Then I worked as a data team of one at a New York bakery called Milk Bar, which some of you are hopefully familiar with. We were just trying to basically set up BI to on top of all the cookies and cakes data that we had coming in. So there I was an early Looker user and an early DBT user. Got my hands on some of the modern data stack as it's now known. And then from there I went to Spotify, where I worked on an enormous team, an enormous org with insane quantity of data, sometimes insane quality of data, more often than not, middling quality. And so I think, hopefully that will be interesting today to talk about, what does it look like to pursue data quality at all of those different stages. After that, I started Spectacles with Dylan, and Spectacles is a continuous integration tool that helps Looker developers test their code, go home earlier, have fewer bugs, and ultimately maintain trust in their data teams. So yeah, excited to get into it today.
Awesome. Thanks both. So to set the scene for both of you and for everyone in attendance today, we're kind of going to structure this conversation in roughly kind of 3 sections. The first and almost definitely the quickest will be just setting a scene of what we mean by data quality. I think that can mean different things for different orgs, different sizes, Josh, as you alluded to. And so we will cover that. I think given the attendees today, we don't need to dwell too much on that. I think frankly, just by virtue of having signed up for a webinar called How to Prove Data Quality ROI, you're probably bought in on the data quality is an issue bit. But from there, we'll go on to talk about that ROI piece. What do we mean by ROI? How do we quantify it? How do we explain that to people internally? And then from there, we'll just move on to, what organizations should be doing to achieve data quality. And that includes obviously software, as all of us run software that helps data quality, but also process, people, culture, all things like that. And so just for all of you in attendance, hopefully that gives you a sense of what's coming. And then at the end of all of that, there will be an opportunity to ask Josh, Kevin, and myself questions. And please, so as you're going, just ask those in the Slack channel, and I'll grab those at the end of our conversation and ask them to the group here. So to kick off, Kevin, can you talk us through kind of when we say data quality, what does that actually mean? What does that look like for different organizations?
I'm going to butcher the Tolstoy quote from Anna Karenina that all clean data is the same and all dirty data is dirty in its own particular way. And there's so many different ways in which data can be low quality. Everyone with us here today can probably come up with 10 examples, and when pressed, come up with 100 more. I think the cleanest way to categorize a data quality issue for me has been to think about, is this an issue that we could have detected like intrinsically, right, without thinking about a use case? So for example, is referential integrity being violated? Are there nulls in a column that should be not null? Those are kind of independent of the use case. And on the other side of the coin, there's the more extrinsic use cases, which are driven by someone using the data. So for example, is this data being used on a quasi real-time basis to send marketing emails to e-commerce customers that have abandoned the cart? Or is it used on a quarterly basis for board meetings? And that dictates the standard that data has to meet. And the reason I refer to that is because when data does not meet that standard, for any reason, from my perspective, it's a data quality issue. But it's highly, highly driven by what the data is being used for. And it could be in terms of the timeliness or the freshness of the data. It could be in terms of the accuracy, right? Accuracy can be on a high level, it's directionally correct. To a low level, like this specific account has the wrong attribute attached to it. But this, to me, is entirely the result of talking to the person using the data and seeing what they expect from it.
That makes a ton of sense. I like the paraphrase quote. Josh, anything you'd add to that definition?
No, I think like Kevin basically nailed it there. I think data quality kind of comes down to how useful the data is for decision making. If it's not useful for making a decision, it's probably low quality. Maybe by that definition, you could even include data that nobody asked for, right? Sometimes we're guilty of this on data teams. We have to model the whole ocean. We have to have everything perfectly set up. Every single source that we could get in Fivetran, we have to turn it on. And you could almost make the argument that some of that data is not high quality if it's not actually useful for anyone to use. If a problem hasn't come up that requires it, then that's also not high quality data. High quality data is data that gives me accurate, complete information at the exact time when I need it.
So I think that leads us nicely to kind of the other side of this, which is like, what are some misconceptions? Working with that definition, what are some misconceptions that people have about data quality? And I think these can be both like misconceptions from data teams, and also I think particularly misconceptions from like the producers and the consumers of data. Like there's CRM teams upstream, there's finance teams maybe downstream, marketing teams downstream. What are some of the misconceptions about data quality that you've both seen? I don't know who wants to take that first.
Well, I think you're kind of hinting at where I was going to go with this already, which is we'll just get everybody in the room, on our side here, which is that there's a big misconception that data quality is only the data team's responsibility. That like if there's problems in the data, it's because the analytics teams are doing their job. And in reality, like data quality is everyone's responsibility. And I get an amen. But the CRM team, right? There's like Salesforce is a common culprit here. There's issues with application developers where they're not instrumenting things in a way that we've all agreed upon before they launch the feature or the experiment, right? So I think one thing that's a misconception, at least from outside of the data team, I think we within the data team generally are all pretty aware of this, is that like everyone can just continue with business as usual. And if the data team does their job well, we'll have high quality data. When in actuality, you need this real partnership between the data team and all stakeholders to think about what are the inputs to our systems, how are they being monitored, how are they being governed, what's the change management process for a opportunity in CRM, right? And like these are things that are not totally well defined. They're not always easy to figure out, but I think it is really important when we talk about quality that we're thinking about the whole system and not just like what's happening in dbt or what's happening in our CI pipelines, so on and so forth.
I completely agree with that. And I'm eager to jump into the cultural elements that impact data both from producers and consumers. One thing I would also add in terms of how some other non-data teams, other departments might think about data is, okay, it's not our problem, it's a data team's problem, and data should be perfect. Data is perfect. What else are we hiring this data team for and paying this enormous bill for? If it's not to get perfect data, what is it in order to do? But those of us on the call, we know that data is an approximation of the real world. That's what makes it useful, right? It's an approximation that can sometimes yield predictions. But as a result, there are always limitations, right? You can't cover the whole world, can't necessarily cover the entire world that your business is concerned about, right? It's lossy in terms of time. It's lossy in terms of the granularity you get from customers. So it goes back to you again, like, what is the use case that you're trying to accomplish? And the reason that expectation of perfection is, I think, detrimental is because it hurts when people find out that data is not perfect at the end of the day. It's like a kid who got burned. It's like, oh, hold on a second. I went to that board meeting with the wrong number. Screw this. I'm going to go spin up my own shadow analytics stack. I'll get our RevOps person to do analytics in Salesforce instead of looking at Looker. Well, now you have two problems. And I think the more we can set a realistic expectation, the better it is for everyone, because that is the expectation that we have with software. If you think about it, people don't expect software to be free of bugs. They don't expect it to have infinite nines, right? The number of bugs and the number of nines is a result of the budget that you apply to it, right? Both like financial budget, but also risk budget. And I think we can apply that same mindset to data.
Kevin, you talked there about kind of culture playing a real role in prioritizing data quality. Can you talk to, like, I guess in your work, both previously and through Metaplane, what role you see culture play in that? Like, is it always a buy-in from the top thing? It needs to be kind of like, I always use the expression, the fish rots from the head, which is probably a very unpleasant way of like describing this problem. But like, how have you seen culture work, I guess, in a positive and a negative way, to prioritize and kind of work on data quality?
Maybe we can start with the negative because it might resonate most with people in the room.
Yeah.
Where when you have like, okay, there's so many ways to make decisions. And what is it called? Hippo, the highest paid person in the room. We've been in situations where the highest paid person might not use data at all, use my gut, and if data is used, that it's used in a retroactive way to justify decisions that are already made. And therefore, the data itself is not super valuable. And if the data itself is not super valuable, how can data quality have ROI, right? It's a little bit bounded by the ROI of data itself. We've been in those situations, and it happens both from the head of the fish and from the tail of the fish, right? Where, let's say, I don't mean to make it so hierarchical, but if you have a CSM going into an enterprise like quarterly business review with a big client and they bring in the wrong analytics numbers, they'll be burned as well. So I think the more accumulation of this burning, that people talk to each other, like, oh, I don't trust that data anymore, it kind of adds up a bit. This is the kind of like collective scar tissue that we see very often at larger companies, larger, older companies. But if we were to reverse it a little bit and say, okay, what are some examples where the culture around data and the culture around data quality keeps the standard very high, but also realistic? I've seen it in many situations where leaders at the company have seen the reverse. I don't want to deal with that again. Right? I want to work in a situation where decisions are data-driven and we can trust the data. And when we can't trust the data, we have a realistic path to get to trust. And I don't want to say it's entirely because of being burned in the past, because there's definitely a group of leaders and practitioners who see around the corner. There's many of them, probably many of Spectacles' and Metaplane's as customers, but there's a lot of being burned.
Yeah, Josh, anything you'd want to add there?
Well, that is certainly a top-down angle to it of executives and what they've been through. There's also a bottom-up angle. Sometimes all it takes is just one developer or engineer who is like, this is the best way to work, and I've seen it before, and this is how we should all work. Like, so often we see this a lot where we have a senior engineer, a staff engineer, and a team who says, they've decided that they don't want to work without testing and monitoring and quality solutions, again, because they were so convinced of how well it worked in the past. And so when they go to a new job, it's like, all right, we're going to implement this for our team. I think the challenge there from a cultural standpoint, this is less about maybe making the case to non-technical stakeholders or executives, but there's certainly a cultural aspect of making a case to your own teammates that you should have certain checks or requirements for the work that you're doing. And I've seen this done well, and I've seen it done poorly. I think when it's done poorly, you have kind of an overbearing senior engineer who comes in, or a team manager, and says like, this is the way we're going to do things. And there's like all these really obtrusive checks and requirements. And it really slows down development velocity, especially for things that maybe didn't need that high of a quality standard to get to the answer in the first place. So I think on the one hand, if your personality is such that like you're kind of a perfectionist and you really want everything to be right, and you're here at this data quality webinar because you're obsessed with data quality, like you might want to check yourself a little bit and think about, when is perfection impeding progress, and what is the way to get everyone on my team, even people who don't share this kind of personality trait as me, being on board with having extra work to go through in order to merge their PR or get their work done. And then if you're on the other side of it, I think it's like being open to the fact that you can actually move faster and get more work done when you have a good platform, when you have a good base of operations that's checking your work in an automated way, that's like making sure things are following a standard. Like, I think the lie there is that like, when I do things fast and quickly my way, that's actually the most efficient way, in which in reality, you can be more efficient as a team when you like all understand the standards of the code, and you can read through things and find what you need. And like, you're all passing the same checks in your CI pipelines and stuff like that. So I feel like you're trying to find where along that spectrum your team is and guide them in the right way to land at something that's going to give you data quality, but that also people will use and be bought into.
Awesome. So let's take the conversation from there to the actual ROI component. Everyone on this call, or most people on this call, at some point in their lives will have had to justify kind of some of the work that we're talking about, kind of putting in place that process, spending a sprint cleaning up data, wanting to buy Metaplane, Spectacles, some other tool to clean up data. And they're asked in this like often, I think, very like probably financial way, like, what is ROI? And before we dig into like how you quantify that, how you make an argument for it, it's probably worth defining what we mean by that. Kevin, do you want to kind of, I guess, talk to like, when you think about people talking about ROI of data, what that means to you?
Sure. I think we all like the definition is in the name. In a sense, like it's return on investment, right? The return divided by the investment. There's a lot of nuance in both, but one misconception I want to start with, especially in the current conversation about data and ROI, is that the R does not mean revenue. Like, we are not only looking for ways to grow the top line revenue of a company. The R is return, and that takes revenue and risk and cost into account. So if we can be reductive for a second, zoom out, like companies are piles of cash. They're piles of discounted cash flow. And what goes into those piles of discounted cash flow? It's revenue, risk, and cost. And as members of a data team, there's many levers that we can pull in order to influence those three main outcomes. Right? We can help drive better decisions. We can make decisions faster or even automated. We can make the product or service that we provide stronger as the result of data. And there's tools and practices to do that. We're going to get into that here. But whenever we help teams justify ROI, we make sure to include the risk and the cost component as well, both in the short term and in the long term, right? and on both sides of the numerator and the denominator. But maybe I can stop there.
Absolutely. Josh, how do you,
Oh.
how do you kind of
Don't
think
stop.
about that?
You were on a roll. That was great. Yeah, I think Kevin's got a little bit more of a sophisticated mental model for this than I do. I really like that way of thinking about it. I think the first place my mind goes when you're talking about justifying is just like wasted time. I mean, that maybe is the most tangible to an executive or someone outside the data team is, hey, do you remember when that thing blew up last month? Well, it took so and so a week and a half to get to the bottom of that and figure out why it happened. And so it's pretty easy to tie that to the average salary in your team and assign some dollars there. I think the harder one is the like risk of making bad decisions off of data that was not correct, or the risk of making a decision today, or like the risk of making a decision that you should have made today, but actually you can't make until a week from now because of issues with data quality. Those are a little bit harder to justify. And it's because it's like a liability that you're trying to mitigate, and the liability is potentially uncapped. Depending on what the business is and the decision you're trying to make, that risk could be really, really big or really, really small. And I wonder if, we should take some inspiration from teams that are very like risk focused. Like cybersecurity feels like a very good analogy to me, where you're a cost center, you're not driving revenue, but the work that you're doing is still extremely important to the business. And I know that like in those industries, there are kind of formulaic ways that you can say, well, this incident could happen. We assign it this risk, we assign it this cost to the business. And that's our like dollar value ROI for mitigating something like that by 50%. I think you can probably work your way into numbers, but even just qualitatively, I think it's worth giving that message to people is like, we want to empower you to make the best decisions you possibly can. And if we're empowering you with data that is not very quality, then there are all kinds of risks that come along with that. Everybody can like understand that if I'm making decisions off of bad data, that like I'm not doing my job well. So yeah, maybe some kind of a approach like that makes sense, or maybe we have something to learn from other industries.
That is a great analogy. And my hope is that the data team can maybe even have an easier time doing that ROI calculation than a cyber team, for example, because ideally, right, no breaches have occurred, but data quality issues unfortunately happen all the time. When we talk to practitioners, one of the first questions we ask is, when was the last time a data quality issue occurred? And the answer is almost always a laugh, and then today.
Yeah.
And I think so when we have our ROI calculator, it's a glorified spreadsheet. I'm not going to beef it up. We think about like P0, P1, and P2 issues. Is it like a critical customer impact, all hands on deck, start paging people, P0s, like the high priority, you don't have to wake up in the middle of the night, but your week might be reshuffled, and the P0, the low impact that you have to like balance against other priorities, but doesn't necessarily float to the top of the list. And when we have these three buckets, we think about what is the frequency, like the number of times per year that it occurs, how much time does it take to resolve, and what is the average cost of the company, both in terms of the material concrete costs and the opportunity cost, which is much harder to quantify. But I think we can take advantage of the fact that these incidents most likely have occurred before, to take a good account of them, right? To look in the past, look through Jira tickets and look through the Slack, like whatever incidents channel you have, and run through this exercise. I guarantee it's going to be harder than you expect, but easier. But everything going forward might be easier now that you have this historical record. This is like the biggest portion of our spreadsheet and how we talked with our customers. But Josh, you mentioned that it highly depends on the size and the shape of the company, and especially for smaller companies, engineering speed, I found, resonates a lot, right? Companies that are more biased towards, okay, we need to move faster. Many startups and many scale-ups are in this category. And some variables that we found resonate are, okay, how much time does it take you to onboard a new hire, right? How many PRs are you submitting on average per person over the course of a month or course of a year? And when you use a tool like Spectacles, how much time can you shave off every single PR? And I guarantee that that number is going to be substantial relative to the financial cost of procuring a tool, even trying to build something yourself, right? Because it all multiplies out, right? We know that engineering talent is not cheap, and many companies have many engineers, depending on your vertical, of course, but the numbers really do shake themselves out when you take something as frequent as PRs and something as large as engineering teams.
And so I guess I think that resonates a ton with what we see at Spectacles. I think something we see, I expect many people on this call are interested in, like, hey, I want to go internally and make a case for this tool or this process or whatever. And I think one of the ways that we lean on it a lot is we can make a financial ROI positive argument just with the like pull requests times time saved times people who do it. And it takes some of the pressure off quantifying the more intangible stuff. Because you basically say, hey, I'm going to make an ROI positive, like a dollar amount ROI positive case just on time saving, just on human hours saved. And hey, you're going to get all this other stuff like more trust, be a more data-driven company that, like, yes, we can, Kevin, to your point, we can quantify, but it's hard to, and people, like, ironically have not that much trust in the way that you can quantify that number. And so we like make this, you find ways, I think a piece of advice I would have for people and try to make this, and it's certainly the way we try to help people with it, is try if you can to make a clear financial ROI positive argument, and then push all the additional things, like acknowledge to some degree that they are to some degree intangible, but say like, hey, I appreciate that you're going to struggle to put a dollar amount on all these other things, but they are real and they are an additional benefit of this thing that we're going to put in place. But you should already be kind of assuaged by the fact that just on like a time saving component, this software, this process already pays for itself.
This is maybe a slightly spicy analogy, but it's like, what is the ROI of education, right?
Right.
Like, should a government entity provide public education? And yes, like you can make the argument of, okay, we will have X many workers and they will be Y more productive, and this is the result of the GDP on our country. And people do that calculation. But like you're saying, it needs to be one part of the overall persuasion package, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of that is like, Josh, I'd be interested in your view here, because you've been at organizations of all sizes, but like part of that's just culture. Part of that is just us saying like, hey, we care about data and therefore we care about these things. And like, without putting numbers, one leads to the other, and therefore this makes sense, at some dollar amount. Josh, I guess like at different sizes, how have you seen, I know at Milk Bar, I imagine you were like, hey, team of one, I kind of get to do what I want, all the way up to Spotify. Kind of, how did you see those conversations, whether it was about tools or process or anything, happen at different levels?
Yeah, well, certainly at Milk Bar, the argument for data quality was just that I needed to check my work. I didn't trust myself to do everything perfectly, and I didn't have code review. I didn't have a senior engineer who could help with that. So the argument there was mainly just about the insurance policy of, if I pushed a bug, that I would catch it with a test or something like that before it ended up in the arms of an unsuspecting stakeholder. I think going up in company size, data proliferation starts to become a real problem. Certainly this was the issue at Spotify, was just there was great platform, there were great tools. It was almost too easy to be able to spin up a data pipeline and create a data set. And in that kind of an environment, it's really less about making sure that every single piece of data is high quality, and more about making sure that data is appropriately tagged with what life cycle it's at, with who owns it, with what level of testing has been applied. And so Spotify had a really great system that I still highly recommend, which is called Golden Data. It was the predecessor to this accreditation for a data set, was what they called Test Certified for Data. And this was something they were actually rolling out, not just for data sets, but for software as well. But basically assigning a level 1, 2, and 3, and they were actually just granted automatically as these badges that would go on to data sets based on the level of test coverage and certain check marks that you had done for that data set. So it was like things like metadata and SLA and CI/CD. And if you had done enough of those things, you'd hit level 1 and then 2. And then I think at one point, level 3 was even like required review from a central team to say that, like, yes, this is our highest standard of quality. This is where we want everybody at the company to be looking at for data about streams. I thought that system was really great because in a world where you have thousands and thousands of data sets and you don't know what to use, search is certainly part of it, but you need a level of like reputation. And it's not as simple as just saying this one was queried more times than this one was, so let me go with that. You need some level of like stamp of approval that the people who created this are maintaining it, they've invested in it, it's well tested and all of that. And of course, not every company can build that, right? There were entire teams of people responsible for this. But I do think as a philosophy, it's a really smart approach of just saying like, okay, what is the data at our company that we want everybody to go to? And what quality standards do we want it to achieve before we send everybody there?
Absolutely. Probably got 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll open it up to some Q&A. I think one of the things that many people here are curious about is like how you recommend organizations approach the process of evaluating and selecting like tools and solutions in particular. I think this is obviously relevant to us because of what we all do for a living. But for example, Metaplane and spec tools take, I think, like different approaches to data quality and quite probably symbiotic in the grand scheme of things. But I'd be interested in both of you recommend recommend how companies approach thinking about like what tool do we need, what is the problem, and kind of how you recommend they go through that process.
Maybe I can start.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Very curious what Josh thinks of that. To resurrect the Tolstoy quote again, right? Like data quality issues can occur anywhere in the value chain, right? Whether you're getting third-party alternative data via SFTP, or someone is, shipping a PR with some incorrect LookML, not with spectacles, of course, but it's anywhere along the chain. And I think the important aspect is to see, okay, where does it lie? What is the type of issue? And what is the frequency of issue? So you kind of have like this 3-dimensional map where you have a couple of hotspots. And with that like root cause analysis in mind, I feel like this is where the classic people, processes, tools approach comes in, where if we start with a goal, okay, so the goal is to reduce the number of errors that are caused because of third-party data vendors. Well, what are some, like, what can you do as a person? Right? What is like one specific task that can be done? Well, we can make the typing of our ingester more robust, right? But then how do you, and maybe that'll be enough. But if it's not enough in a one-off way, we need highly directed, consistent, accessible action, which is a process, right? So building in a process to say, okay, now every time we ship a PR for this connector, we're going to run it past a suite of tests and a suite of requirements. Okay, well, shipping that PR is becoming a little bit of a pain. How can we automate that? Well, that's where the tooling comes in. But I think it all flows downstream from what are the issues that occur, and how can you assess whether or not you're actually making some real traction against the issue? Maybe it has to be a conversation with another team, tends to be. Maybe it doesn't have to be, but it all kind of trickles down from there and what is required to address the issue.
Yep. I just want to basically plus one that, because I think it also, in combination with what you said before about how we see data quality incidents all the time, and that can help us justify ROI. I actually think that's like the perfect approach, because you've done it manually for long enough that you should have a pretty good idea of what the cost is to do it yourself. And I think where you will run into trouble is like there's a lot of marketing dollars in the modern data stack, and you're like, we just got to have this, this, and this, and like, oh, we need this solution and this solution because we have to check these boxes. I always recommend just do it manually. Do it manually for a while, like do it yourself, or like write your own little bot to do it. And when you get to the point where, okay, this is really burdensome, and it's burdensome because it's wasting 10 hours of developer time a month, it's like, oh, boom, there's my ROI. Now I have something that I can easily and tangibly take to someone and say, we should invest in this tool because it's going to save us XYZ.
We're running a little long, so I'm going to ask one last question, and then we will we'll go to Slack if people have questions there. So I will just prime the attendees who are with us. If you do have questions for the group, please drop them in Slack. We'll get to them in just a second. The last question I have for Kevin and Josh is, I think we've talked a lot about kind of like what the world looks like today from a data quality point of view and from a tooling point of view. Obviously, the world is changing constantly at a rapid rate, but maybe feels even more so in the last 3 to 6 months than it has before, certainly in our lifetimes. Would be interested in kind of an emerging trend or technology that both of you are, I guess, have either seen or like imagine is coming that you think is going to have a significant impact on ROI or data quality or anything like that. In no particular order.
I'll try to give a non-GPT answer, even though I think that's kind of the elephant in the room, right? Like we're all looking at AI, how it's going to change things. I'm still very excited about and interested in all the kind of, to use the buzzword, data contracts work, but just this idea that things could be schematized, and that as you look at interfaces between your third-party vendor and your analytics database, between your production database and your analytics database, between your analytics database and your BI tool, right? And all these places where data is jumping over a river to get to the other side, that you could have defined schemas and expectations that essentially allow you to know before you even start whether a change you're making is going to break things or not. And I think even to take it a step further, I mean, in some ways, this is like a harkening back, or like, I mean, not harkening back, but this is the world of like writing data pipelines in Scala and like statically typed languages. But getting to this world where like I can just in my IDE see that this doesn't compile, and here are the changes that I need to make to fix it. Like I'm very excited about a world where analytics work follows typing and schemas in a more rigorous way, but in a way that's not so burdensome that it takes forever to do any kind of work. And I think there's lots of interesting projects and players, so it'd be cool to see where that goes.
Awesome. Kevin?
So very excited for data contracts, and especially how it intersects with streaming and real-time data. Now, streaming and real-time data has been coming for the past a very long time, but it feels like we're approaching a point that it'll be roughly like within the realm of possibility for many companies. And I'm excited about this, and also wary about streaming data because of the number of use cases it can unlock, right? Within a product, within a service, the kinds of decisions that can be made, but a little wary of it because of the data quality implications, where now there's not even the possibility of a human check. And it's even more automated checks are going to be a little bit tougher to apply. Are we really going to, have a machine learning model for every single event that comes in, or even batch of events? Potentially, I mean, maybe it's possible. I think it'll be very difficult though. So as the stakes are higher and our means to address them are lower, I think there's always something to watch.
Awesome. Well, thank you both very much. This has been a really interesting conversation. I just ask attendees again, if you do have any questions, drop them in Slack. We don't have any yet, which is maybe for the best, given that we've run a little long, but we can give people a minute to ask one. And just while we wait for that or close out today, want to thank both of you again. This has been genuinely interesting, been a super interesting panel to have, and I hope all the attendees have enjoyed it as well, and certainly as much as I have. And I would just highlight to the attendees that we do this every 2 weeks. And so if you have a panel you'd like to be on, a panel you'd like to see, just like a topic you'd like to see us cover, please get in touch. We're always really happy to both get feedback, but also kind of collaborate with people in the community. If you want to present, I think this like webinars, I think like Josh and I met because I was speaking at an event, and I think we kind of like believe in people kind of taking these opportunities and trying to help people get there. And so genuinely, if you've got like a half-baked idea, particularly if it's Looker related, very happy to work with you and kind of forge it into something really kind of like helpful to the community and give you a platform to share it. So that would just be
Come
kind of
back
my
and,
call to
and tell
action.
us how you sold data quality to your boss, and
For sure.
we'll interview you about how it went. We'd love to do something like that.
We've got one question that's come in, which Gordon prefaces with, impossible to give a short answer, but I'd be interested in Kevin's experience in communicating the SPC type of variance awareness at DQ.
Data quality.
Oh, yes.
DQ,
Great question.
thank you.
Right. So SPC is a statistical process control. At least, yes, it is. And it's so one common way that this is being applied is to detect anomalies in data, right? Many times to detect anomalies in, like, in metadata, like, okay, the number of rows in a table is much higher than you expected, or freshness this table is much more delayed than you expect. Another way that it's being applied is detecting anomalies in the data itself, right? So like revenue is spiking, and it is impossible to give a short answer. What I would say is that, especially for the latter situation, if I'm understanding your question correctly, Gordon, that it's less about like, okay, this data is not fresh, or like the number of rows is not what we expect, but to focus on something being weird and incorrect. Like, when was the last time you saw a weird number, right? That is a good, I think, word to anchor on in terms of communicating the results of statistical process control. I would not use the word personally, and more focusing on like the outcome of it being weird. And I definitely agree with your added comment of focusing on the critical few. I think this is relevant both in terms of the criticality of the issue and also the criticality of the table or column or metric that is being monitored. It's a little bit tough to tell from the outside necessarily, maybe through some combination of lineage and usage. That's how our customers do it, but there's a lot of domain expertise being involved as well. But yeah, there's a lot of layers here. It's a really great question.
I like, someone told me once that like every great data insight comes from like running a query and going like, huh, that's weird. And then like that just is the beginning of the rabbit hole that takes you to like some like company shifting outcome or something. But it's like, it's literally you run a query and like, well, that's odd. And I'm going to go and figure out like to what degree that's odd or why it's odd or whatever it might be.
Totally.
Let's do one last question, which I think is relevant to everyone, which is like tips or advice on organizations just getting started with improving data quality. Like, where should people think about like how to get started if they're kind of like going from the ground up?
Yeah,
Josh,
I mean,
maybe
again, I would caution the like, don't be a solution in chase of a problem. In search of a problem, right? So think about actual data quality issues that you've had in the past and start with those. But think about what kind of people processes first. Like, what kind of things can you do as a person or as a team? Whether this is, hey, we should use pull requests in our project now because we want to start doing code reviews, or hey, maybe we should learn about like how to write tests with GPT or Great Expectations or something like that, and start making sure that things are matching our assumptions. But do it from the lens of what has happened before and how do we prevent it, and that will lead you down all the paths of best practice that you need to go without accidentally creating too many requirements for you to do your work nimbly. Because I think, like Kevin mentioned, on a small team and a small company, your goal is trust and speed. You want to deliver an answer as quickly as you possibly can to unblock the business decision. And you want to do it in a way that people start to rely on the data team and the analytics stack as a source of critical information to make their decisions.
Kevin, anything you'd add there?
Just one to that. I think there's a lot of noise in the market right now, and it all comes down to the problems that you have faced and maybe one step ahead, right? I do think it's worth looking around the corner a little bit, right? Perhaps learning from practitioners at, if you're at a Series A company, at a Series B company, or if you're about to go public, talking to practitioners at public companies. But there's definitely not one size fits all. And I love Josh's very, pragmatic lens of these issues have occurred. Let's learn from them.
Awesome. Well, let's call it there. Kevin and Josh, just a big thank you again for all the conversation we've just had. Kevin, we'll have to make sure to have you on again some point in the future. And a big thank you to all the attendees. Appreciate we've run a little long today, so I hope you've all enjoyed it as well. That is it from us today. We hope to see you all in a couple of weeks for the next webinar. You can head to our website, spectacles.dev/webinars, to see everything that's coming up. So I hope to see you then. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.